This is something I'm really delighted that we've had such support from all the OEMs to take part in this. And the moderator is somebody that I know incredibly well. He's been a massive supporter of AviaDev, and he is the owner and publisher of ATC News. So please allow me to invite Professor Wolfgang to the stage. Big round of applause, please.
He started this competition thing with the African necktie. I thought I expanded a little to introduce African shirts. And then my friend Kocho from Agra looked at me and said, "You call that an African shirt? You've got to come to Agra, to Ghana, and I show you African shirts." So I promise, next time, I'll wear a proper African shirt from Ghana.
I'll wear one tonight. There you go.
All right, good. The question today is, and that has been put to me, what is the right aircraft for Africa? Now, that is a very big question, and of course we all know that it begs to ask even more questions. And those questions we try to answer today. We need to find out what are these aircraft to be used for. Domestic services, probably going into national parks and rough fields, or secondary or tertiary aerodromes and airports. Is the airline flying regional or even continental, or is the airline flying intercontinental? That all determines the question, what is the right aircraft? What short, medium, and long-haul development plans do these airlines have? Where are the nearest maintenance facilities? Where are the nearest simulator stations that training can be carried out? And then, of course, is the airline a properly planned and financed startup? Or is it an upstart? And the difference between startup and upstart, I think, is very obvious. Shoddy planning, poor implementation of equally poor business plans. And then, of course, those are the ones who bring in the old birds. They get next for nothing, and then they drown in maintenance cost, dispatch problems, and, of course, fuel costs, which blow them away sooner or later. You can see many questions which needs answering, and we have only 45 minutes. I've asked for lunch to be postponed. They said that is not possible. So I'm trying to do a deal with the people outside to lock the doors, to have you in the room for another 45 minutes extra. We shall see. I'm now inviting my panel members up, and in alphabetical order of their company, Mark Dunnachie from ATR, Chamsou Andjorin from Boeing, Antonio Ficca, who is standing in for Jean-Paul from Bombardier, and Michal Nowak from Embraer. A round of applause for all of them. Now, every panel member will now, in that order as they came up, give a brief introduction of themselves, what they do in their organizations, and I will then direct a few questions to you. And then the audience will have ample opportunity, that's where the lunch element comes in, to ask more questions, what you want to know from them, how to go about determining the right bird for Africa. Thank you for your attention, and when you have time, in your own time, clock in at atcnews.org and see what I keep writing about aviation in Africa. Thank you very much so far. ATR, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Wolfgang, and thank you, John. Proud to be sponsors of AviaDev this year. I've been watching John and his ties for the last few years, fascinated by him. I think, his next challenge is to do that space jump thing, when you drop from space to Earth. So look, from the ATR perspective, we already have a very strong footprint in Africa. Really encouraged by what I hear in terms of the regional connectivity. To us, that is key. You know, when you look at the statistics, 10% additional flights into a region, 8% growth in tourism, 6% growth in GDP, and 5% growth in forward investment into that community. So we're all speaking the same language. How we make that happen is the next challenge. You know, a lot of admiration for our colleagues working on the open skies. Hugely challenging, hugely challenging. I had the privilege of spending time in Asia, and the ASEAN initiative still isn't off the ground, and they've been talking about that for decades as well. So I think walking first before you run, hugely important. And at least from our perspective, as you saw with some of my comments earlier this morning, we have a very green aircraft, but even more importantly, we have the most cost-competitive solution in the regional segment. We burn approximately 50% less fuel than a regional jet. So for us, it's about offering the optimum cost solution, providing that essential regional connectivity through a very safe, reliable, and comfortable platform. It just happens to have propellers. Rick, I loved your comments about the propeller. That was really encouraging to hear. And if you look at all the forward technology coming through, whether it's Uber taxis, whatever, everything generally is with a propeller spinning. So delighted to be here and look forward to meeting many of you, hopefully over lunch. Over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Mark. Now comes a representative of a company. You do not have propeller planes, I think, on your product line.
Not commercially.
Not directly, anyway. You used to,
you
but
have
that is a long time.
Yeah, on the military
So,
side.
floor open for Chamsou, representing Boeing, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks, John, for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to talk before this distinguished audience. My name is Chamsou Andjorin. I'm the Director for Government Affairs and Market Development for Sub-Saharan Africa, Boeing International. And we look at, the question is very strange because we're looking at what is the best airplane for Africa. I would say you all know the answer. It's Boeing airplanes. But you have put it in perspective, and the questions you ask are very important. These are exactly the questions we need to answer. And going through these questions, you can end up with very different answers. And I think all of us here provide answers.
And none of the answers may be wrong.
Yes. So we are here to talk about that and see how mostly airlines should proceed and approach the question to have the right answer. But if you want a quick answer, it's Boeing.
Thank you very much. Michal, Embraer.
Oh, little mistake. Antonio, Bombardier.
Yeah.
Michal, Embraer.
You know, otherwise my neck starts.
All good. So
shift the chair. Embraer, you do have propeller aircraft, yes?
We do not manufacture one anymore, but we
But
do.
you do still have
We
them
do still have in
on your
portfolio
supply
our-
line. So,
Yeah.
what is the right aircraft for Africa?
Before I answer this, good afternoon, everyone. Compared to my fellow panelists, I'm a newbie in this room. It is I have joined Embraer only last year. Before I worked at the airline, so I was on the other side, and it's also first time for me doing AviaDev, and only I think third time in Africa. But still, I hope that my outsider view might be interesting for you. As much as I'd love to answer that Embraer is the right one, yeah, we have some advantages probably, and I can probably say we're the second OEM in terms of a fleet count in Africa by a thin margin. So I think the competition for this second place is quite fierce. But I think, yeah, when I hear the question, what is the right aircraft for Africa, there's a little red flag in the back of my head. My background is management consulting. And this question somehow suggests that Africa is specific. And in management consulting, you often meet people from various industries, and you often hear, my industry is specific, my region is specific. And to me, always the warning light is people try to hide some inefficiencies or not optimal decisions behind this statement. This is specific. And of course, Africa has some specifics, and we can dig into details later on. But I think what Africa needs is, most of all, responsible and intellectually rigid fleet decisions. There's no one magic aircraft that's going to solve all the problems. One of the major problems is the profitability of the carriers. And in order to bring the carriers to profitability, you need responsible fleet decisions. And yeah, I think for the beginning, this will be my statement, and we can then explore what doesn't really mean in details.
And of course, the question of financing of new aircraft, which in Africa seems to be a greater challenge than in many other places. I think we know why. And that has been holding back the penetration of the market with newer aircraft. You just certified the new 195 E2 just 2 or 3 weeks ago by FAA and EASA. Getting new aircrafts onto the fleets in Africa has been a big challenge. And so my question is, in the same order again, what sales pitch do you... Oh, no.
I need...
You see...
Thank you very much.
You completely threw me off my game.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I will not do that again.
Okay, now I turn the
I
chair
apologize.
and look firmly at you, then I focus on you.
Antonio.
Yes. From...
Bombardier.
Bombardier. And he was on the panel yesterday evening.
Yes.
And he has much to say, I'm sure, after you were the only one showcasing a brand new aircraft last night.
Very good, thank you. Thank you for...
I do remember a few things.
Oh, absolutely,
Yes.
I'm glad about that. So, quick introduction. Antonio Ficca, I'm Italian, made and raised. I guess you can hear that from my accent. I'm responsible for marketing for Bombardier commercial aircraft, all of what we call Middle Earth, Europe, Russia, Middle East and Africa. And a bit like Michal, I'm a little bit new to this position. I was appointed in that role just 3 months ago. But I've been with marketing for OEMs for a lot of time. I know Boeing, of course, Embraer, ATR. We all have our opinion of what is the right product for the market. I think the real question, as I agree with Michal, is more about what are the conditions that facilitate the market to grow, and how can OEMs support that growth. So obviously, it's our belief that our suite of products are very well designed to support that growth. I heard this morning through a different panel a couple of very interesting items. I took note of them. One is of course, sustainability, which I think Michal was talking about in his reference. I noted sustainability. I noted connectivity. Of course, the high-cost environment that is specific to Africa, but not only to Africa. And the ease of travel. And the last video was, I guess, a very good representation of that. I personally believe that in that context, there is one market that somehow represent the reference for how profitable, easy, and let's say convenient is for people to travel, airlines to grow, and infrastructures to go, which is maybe the North American market. And that market has a characteristic which is unique, which is to have a strong, extremely strong regional aircraft foundation. And maybe people don't know, but because when we think of airplanes, we always think about the large, the long-haul, wide bodies, and of course, they are a great part of our industry. But in one of the most, I guess, profitable market, one of the most easy-to-travel market, regional aircraft are actually 4 times more than wide bodies. It's maybe a statistic that not everybody is familiar with. Regional aircraft represent 4 times, there are 4 times more regional aircraft than wide bodies, and that indicates how important is connectivity, how important is economics, right sizing, how important is experience, passenger experience, to the wealth of a region. Obviously, it's not the only one, but it's key. And in my mind, when I hear what I heard this morning, and I hear when we speak with all of you, there is an element that we can help with as aircraft manufacturers is to design airplanes that, in a way, address those key requirements, being economical, being reliable, being supporting the growth of the airlines, but doing so with a product that suits the market needs, the airline needs. Obviously, we all have an opinion which is the best product to suit the needs, but I think there is a question of more where is the market going and what the airlines need, and based on that, then determine which is the best combination of products that could serve the fleet decisions and the airline needs.
So you've had some key insights from these four gentlemen. What sales pitch do you actually use from your company in order to sell new aircraft to this market?
Look, I mean, I've been selling aircraft for nearly 30 years, so it's kind of in the DNA. I think you have to listen. You have to listen to the customer. That's key. You have to produce technology where it makes sense. Airlines don't particularly like to hear that you're building in a lot of ingredients into the recipe that they don't need, they don't want to pay for. So everything that we do in terms of innovation, whether it's the cabin stream system that we launched with AfriJet, which is an onboard streaming system for videos, anything like this, we always put into the same cost equation model, which is the analysis of does this make sense for the airline on the cost curve. Wolfgang, you're asking also about the financing. Hugely important in any market, but obviously an issue in Africa as well. There, we're fortunate that we have what I would call an investment-grade asset, in the sense that it's a popular product with lessors, with banks. We can offer export credit financing, and we can also mix in pre-owned aircraft. We don't differentiate in terms of how we support someone. If they start with one pre-owned aircraft, we're equally happy. Finally, just one last point, and I'm sure John will excuse me for making a brief plug here, but on the 21st of May, we will have a first ATR forum around regional connectivity in Johannesburg. I extend an open invitation to you all here. I can't extend an open invitation to my colleagues on the panel, because that would be discriminatory. But it would be a real pleasure. If any of you are interested, please reach out. We have a whole host of panels. It will not be a propaganda day. We will give you a little bit of propaganda around our product, of course, but it's really around the importance of regional connectivity.
The facts, which the audience wants to know.
21st of May in Johannesburg. So if you're interested, please reach out to me in the break. And by the way, as a Scot, it's free of charge. And I know that's important. Thank you, Wolfgang.
The accountants will be very happy to hear that when it comes to travel expenses.
Absolutely.
Right. You talked about selling new aircraft, but not being shy also to sell pre-owned aircraft, which obviously you've looked over and brought them up to fully checked status that they are almost as new.
Absolutely. And just on this regional connectivity, if you take a statistic, we typically, as ATR, open globally 150 routes every year. These are routes that have not been flown before. Sometimes in certain operations, we're the only link to the doctor or the dentist. And that's not a market where the Boeing will make sense or the Airbus. Everyone has their niche, and all my colleagues would agree on this. We think our niche is in the smaller connected routes.
And that has been said. Connectivity through smaller aircraft, regional aircraft,
Absolutely.
both prop and small jets, is much more developed in Africa than in many other parts of the world. Now, Boeing, what sales pitch do you use in order to sell new aircraft? I know you're not in the market of selling other pre-owned aircraft that is, on private platforms, but how do you go about selling aircraft here in Africa?
The aircraft is the last piece of the speech, because the first thing that we need to consider is the market requirements. So, and the airlines know the markets. We have some data on the market. We need to have a conversation on what is the market they want to serve, and what is the positioning on the market, what is the segmentation on the market. And then from there, you look at the network. How is the connectivity built? What is the requirement? And you can come up with different type of airplanes that satisfies the traffic and network combination. And then you have to compare the performance of these different aircraft. Can this aircraft satisfy, has the performance to carry the payload on that segment, or on that route? So there are a lot of questions that you go through, and you have to go through it not only for today, but tomorrow, because once you buy an airplane, you are locked in for 60% of your cost over a long period of time. So it's very important to have the right airplane selection. And I think the airlines know that exercise, they do that. That's part of your strategy. The airlines that are successful are those who have a strategic plan in place. Those who want to buy an airplane today for delivery tomorrow usually don't last. But if you have a strategic plan, a proper thought strategy, including the financing issues that you mentioned, and to facilitate all this, I want to take this opportunity to talk about the African Aviation Industry Group that we have formed with airlines association like ASA, IATA, AFRA, airport like ACIs, and Air Service Navigation like Chamsou, coming together and looking at the roadblocks for aviation to grow in Africa, and we talked about it earlier. These are discussions that we have, and how we collectively can come in and talk to the governments and our stakeholders to facilitate the growth, because as long as the market is restricted to what it is, it's not good for us, for our business.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As part of the global strategy of Boeing, they entered into a partnership with Embraer. Embraer has smaller aircraft in terms of size. The word right-sized has been mentioned already. You, with your short and medium-haul fleet, are limited to a certain segment of the market, and Embraer is in a position, I believe, to go below that and meet the requirements with the E170, 175, E190, and E195. So how do you go about filling that gap in the market? What is your pitch?
What is our pitch? Firstly, I always want to underline the deal has not been validated yet, so for now we continue as two separate companies. But the sole interest of Boeing in pursuing this deal is we treat as a validation of our segment. But what is our pitch? Our tagline is right size for Africa. And I mentioned that Africa needs responsible fleet decisions. And Africa needs to turn its carrier into profitability. And on a very high level, there's a very simple correlation. Load factor is the main driver for the profitability, no matter what you say. And Africa is flying on average at something around 71%, which is 10 percentage points below the global average. And this is one of the key challenges. So on average, Africa is using two big airplanes. I think 70% of departures within the continent, 70% of the markets have less than 130 passengers per departure. Yet 60% of capacity in the continent is delivered by the classical narrow bodies, 320, 737s. So when we speak about responsible decisions, we tend to say right size and focus on your load factor. Second thing, connectivity. It's a word we hear a lot. Vast majority of the services and markets within Africa still have less than 1 daily frequency. And if you look at the global trends, you need to reach this minimum daily flight. This is where you see a stimulation effect kicking in. And then he also asked us, how do we pitch new? We do not pitch new aircraft every time. Again, we pitch responsible decision. We are fortunate to have a quite wide portfolio of solutions. We have a big incumbency with the E1 platform, and we can offer the second-hand aircraft with a lower cost of asset. We can offer now the brand new generation E2. And we really don't have preference. What matters to us is the profitability of the solution to our carrier, because it's one thing to sell an aircraft, but it's completely different and more challenging task to sell aircraft and see the carrier succeed. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, I used to work for Airline, and I used to hear the pitches of everyone. And I'm proud to work for the company now, who has always been, in my eyes, very rigid, responsible, and honest in their recommendation.
Well, that was an interesting answer, don't you think? I saw a lot of nodding from you, Antonio. You see, I've studied, I've written the name down, so I will get that right. What is your pitch as Bombardier? You offer both jets as well as turboprops, suitable for basically every kind of regional market in Africa. And so obviously you have an advantage in your position vis-a-vis your product range. Tell us.
Yeah, so the first, let's say our first starting point, as we discussed with airlines, is to give them the choice. You mentioned we are the only aircraft manufacturer that has turboprops and jets, until also in our case, the Q400 programs will take its own way with Longview, but we have that offering and we have that portfolio of choice. And I think giving the airlines the choice to pick the product that they feel is more appropriate to their requirement is the #1 sort of selling point we can offer. And that's the reason why we have been extremely successful in Africa, and we have a very large footprint in the regional aircraft market. The second point is linked with, let's say, designing a product that meets a certain requirement. And when we look at the requirement for turboprops in Africa, but elsewhere as well, there is an element of performance, there is an element of comfort, there is an element of economics. And we believe, that's our pitch to our airlines, that we have the best aircraft when it comes to comfort, economics, and performance. When it comes to regional jets, we're talking about economics, it's always first, but then reliability and ability to actually serve frequently and reliably destinations in different markets. CRJs is the lightest, most economical aircraft, and now with the new cabin, we're also addressing the needs for more comfort, ease of travel. So we basically look at what the airlines need, and our job as any OEM is try to predict where those needs are going to go and design a product that meets those needs along the way. And when we read the airlines we are talking to, when we listen to what they are looking for, certainly the #1 advantage we have is the possibility to choose and offer the choice. And the second one is that knowing what choices they may want to make, we believe we can justify and explain why our product can satisfy those needs as well. Very often, the question about what is the right aircraft or what is the right product, what is the right solution, I think more the question of what, the question should be why. What is it that you as an airline are looking for? Why you're looking for that? And let me tell you why our product would satisfy that need.
Well, that comes with my next question, because that is going to be an interesting one. How do you determine what aircraft your clients needs? And do you sell an aircraft to the specifications of an airline and what they really need? Or do you sell an aircraft because you've been told, push that thing?
You're asking me?
Yes, we're starting in the same order.
Look, I mean...
of course, you only got one product range, really.
It's abundantly clear. Well, we do have a family of aircraft. We have dedicated freighters. We have 2 product lineups, the smaller 42, the larger 72. In the world of fake news, just a little fact check, and I'm sure Antonio won't mind. Bombardier have actually sold the Q400 program to Viking, and I think that's something just to keep at the back of your minds.
Not yet.
Almost. Let's say it's in the same context as the Embraer Boeing tie-up, almost. So look, from our perspective, we think it's really important to keep it simple. And that's the philosophy we adopt, and that's probably why we've got 75% of the market over the last 10 years in terms of the turboprop. Keeping it simple means giving the best possible solution to the airline on the cost curve. We would not argue that we're the best solution above a certain distance. The argument's always around, where's that turning point? Is it 350 nautical miles, 400, 450? But the fact is, with fuel coming close to $75 and climbing, with the cost base we offer on the turboprop, it is unbeatable. And it's the ATR that's unbeatable. So on that basis, we think we're selling to an airline a real total solution. It's a sophisticated market. People are looking for not just the aircraft, they're saying, where are you going to be afterwards for the support? Where am I going to train my pilots? We got simulators in Joburg, we got simulators in Algeria, we got a customer base that spreads right across the continent, and we provide total solutions in terms of, the spare parts, engineer training, you name it, we do it. That's the name of the game today. The airlines that are here, you're sophisticated buyers. You're not convinced simply by a pretty PowerPoint presentation and a nice product demo. It's about the longevity of the program, the longevity of the partnership, and where we go in the future to support you.
Thank you, Mark. Boeing is up again. Of course, you lack the turboprops, you lack the relatively smaller jets, which some of your colleagues here do have in their product line. And as we just heard, the marriage certificate is not yet signed between Embraer and Boeing. So you will obviously have to wait a little before you have a right-sized aircraft of a smaller capacity in the market. How do you go about selling the right aircraft type to airlines in Africa?
As I said earlier, the aircraft is a solution to a problem that is, can be differently analyzed depending on the customers and the strategy and so and so. So the aircraft comes at the end of that discussion, and it's there to satisfy a needs that has been clearly identified today and for tomorrow. And most of the time, you can end up with a solution that is not simple as a turboprop versus jet or versus... the network combination can lead you to a different solution. And that's what we do. And I want to leave you with a figure resulting for our current market outlook for the next 20 years. In Africa, our studies show that we will need about, based on current situation and reasonable assumptions, we will need 1,170 airplanes in the next 1,190 airplanes for the next 20 years. Out of these, 75% will be single-aisle airplanes, like 737s or any equivalent from the competitor. And then 2% will be regional jets, only 2%. About 15% will be wide bodies, and so and so. And this is a projection that has proved very consistent with the reality. So when we compare the projection that we have made a few years ago to the actual market composition, the difference is very limited. So it's a very accurate projection. That gives us the confidence that the product line that we align to our customers in Africa is quite well adapted to the market evolution. And that is where the reality is.
Well, let's hear the reality from Michal.
According to
you have already very honestly said you will only sell the right type of aircraft to your customer. So
Yeah.
How do you determine what type of aircraft is the right one for them?
It varies by region, and I think Africa in this respect also is going to be slightly different than more mature markets of Europe or United States, where we have established, well-financed big carriers with a whole suite of advanced IT tools, and they are quite sophisticated in determining their needs themselves. In Africa, we often are asked for support, often asked for our view and using our tools to determine it. We try to follow quite standard network and fleet planning rules to deliver our view. Of course, we will always try to focus on the benefits of our product, and there's going to be always a bit of this game here, it's necessary. But I think my message would be to the airlines, don't make rash decisions, don't make decisions under impulse from government owner or ad hoc short-term necessity. Spend some time and compare those studies. Fleet decision has a tremendous impact to the profitability and sustainability of the business in the long term. So it has to be intellectually rigid, and every OEM is trying to do their best to sell. And of course, Airbus and Boeing, with their size, they have more commercial levers to pull, so they might be sometimes even be more successful in putting their product. I'm not saying the 737 or 320s, these are the great aircraft, but with their power, commercial power, they can maybe even get over proportional share on the market. We really have to focus on defending our segment, defending our product, and working twice as hard, but we try to do it with numbers.
Antonio, we heard that, someone whispered that you sold your Q series to Viking, but I believe the cooperation with Viking is very active when it comes to selling those kind of aircraft into Africa. But you remain with the CRJ series, and those are the 700, 900, and 1000, I believe. How do you determine what aircraft to sell to an airline? Do you really look at what they need? Do you look at what your bosses tell you, we need to push this, we need to push that? Or are you at liberty to say, as you mentioned before, we can even offer you a pre-owned aircraft and it will be in very good shape?
So I can tell you that if anybody who's part of the commercial team would probably lie if it says that the OEM's approach are only and purely analytically based. We have to deal with other elements that are part of the discussion, but we start from the analytics. At the end of the day, we have to look at what the network of that customer is going to be, what are their ambitions, what they are opportunities, and our job is to understand their needs and propose
and
solutions.
If you can afford it, of course.
Of course. And so I agree with Michal. I almost hate to do that. This is the third time I say that.
You two make a good team.
Yeah, we should. Maybe not. But no, seriously, there are elements which are true, because I think there is a tendency in the marketplace that believe that bigger is better. You buy a bigger airplane, you get lower seat cost. That means you're going to be a more profitable airline. You have to fill that airplane. And that's why there needs to be a balanced and rational approach to fleet decisions to ensure that you serve and feed your aircraft and your markets with the right product. So the process we go through starts there. We understand what the customer is going. We are trying to understand what their fleet sort of scenarios, buying scenarios could be. Work with them to fine-tune that, and maybe suggest solutions where you could start with a pre-owned and then grow into a certain product over time. A bit of a sales pitch there. Bombardier, on the CRJ side, we offer this continuous commonality between the CRJ 100, 200, all the way to the 1000. Yeah. So for us, going into the market, we have done so successfully, especially in Africa, with a pre-owned solution, and discuss with the operators about growing after into a new aircraft, larger aircraft, is a sound and rational approach to the industry rather than starting the other way around. Analytics, but with a bit of passion, are typically the ingredients for a discussion on a fleet.
Very good. So you in the audience, I think you've heard some very honest answers. You had template replies. You benefited from 30 years of sales experience. That's you, Mark, isn't it?
17 years with Embraer, Michal.
Right. So. Well, you know, the family seems to be expanding here.
Wolfgang, just one thing to share,
yes.
Because you know the practicalities of this are really important as well. You know, I didn't mention it, but we have a routes model, for example. And when I joined ATR last October, the guy showed this to me. And in my career, I'd never seen anything quite like it. It is unique in terms of the kind of tools that I've seen out there. And it's a routes model that effectively calculates where passenger flows are going to be. So it doesn't look at the past, it doesn't look at the now, it looks at the future. And I sat down with a flag carrier who you would assume really had a coherent network plan. And the guy looked and he said, "That route you just showed me, I've been trying to convince my management for the last 2.5 years, and no one believes me." Suddenly we gave him the tool point. It's a gravity-based model. And those of you that join us on the 21st of May, we will have a live demo of that, and any airlines here who want to see it applied to their network. But it reaffirms across the whole African continent the need for that regional connectivity. That's what it comes back to as the base, regional connectivity. And that's something we all passionately share. And passion, I think, is a great word, Antonio. I think you mentioned, or was it Wolfgang?
Yeah,
anyway, passion.
You did.
It's all
Thanks
about
for
passion.
your additional share of wisdom. I want to open the floor to the audience. I'm sure you have your own questions you want to ask. And please raise your hand for the microphone and then ask question directed at any of the 4 individuals. Try to avoid questions posted at all of them. Select one individual and ask your question. There is one there already.
Yeah. Is this on the microphone? So my name is Richard Powell. I'm the Managing Director for a regional airline based in West Africa called West Af. And we're going through the route of discussing with aircraft manufacturers, investors right now. And I've been to a number of these conferences. 2 things. One is the perspective of which is the right aircraft from a pilot's point of view, depending on where you're flying. And also, from a financial point of view, especially in Africa, that we've seen a really good presentation this morning from our Chinese colleagues. And I use one of their telephones, mobile phones, because it's cost effective, it's up to speed. What about Chinese aircraft manufacturers? We've had discussions from them. You know, they could provide us a cost effective solution. And if we're really looking at what the key to getting people into the air, it's cost. So we have to provide a low-cost solution, ticketing price. So what's your, let's start with Antonio. What would you say about the elephant in the room, which is Asia? I worked in a project recently where they've got 30% traffic growth just in Thailand, and it's coming from China. So we know Asia is coming, and Africa could be next. So what do you think about the potential of Chinese aircraft manufacturers?
Well, I think that the answer to me has to go back in history. The aviation is a difficult industry, and we have faced over time many challenges when it comes to establishing product safety, reliability, long-term sustainability of fleet decisions. So with due respect with our Chinese OEM manufacturers, it will take some time until those products will reach the level of reliability. It's my opinion. They will reach the level of reliability that will require, or that the market requires today, the airlines requires today. There are regions in Africa and around the world where you don't have maybe the possibility to actually maintain the product in those airports.
And train the pilots.
Or train the pilots. Pilot shortages is a key issue there. So they will have to face challenges as far as developing themselves as aircraft manufacturers, pilots, and build that experience that will lend them to become, let's say, long-term partners for airlines. I'm not saying they will not get there. They will. I'm sure they will. It's just an element of time, in my opinion. I mean, Bombardier, in our case, the CRJs you guys, I hope you all saw yesterday, that's probably number 1958. It took us 25 years to fine-tune the product and bring it to a level that serves markets and airline expectations in terms of performance, reliability, on time, all of that. It will take some time, but I'm certain they will get there. And I was in Zhuhai, by the way, just to conclude, to the Zhuhai Air Show last November, and I saw the whole fleet from 50-seater turboprop, 70-seater turboprop jet, wide bodies, ultra wide bodies. The future is coming, and that it's probably with them at one point. But I think there is an element of experience and knowledge, and that still, especially for a very delicate and infrastructure, especially for a very delicate industry, I think it will play a factor.
The board is saying time is up. I've just pressed the reset button because John encroached quite considerably at the beginning of the 12 o'clock time. So, lunch will not go away. I made sure of that. I'm sure there are more questions from the audience, and I would really want you to have your fill and ask your questions. What's the right aircraft for Africa?
May I ask a question to Chamsou from Boeing? So I'm trying to reconcile the load factor. I have been trying to reconcile it for many years at the African 71% in the world at the 80-odd. And you indicated that the Boeing study shows that the future you're predicting follows the trend of the past. If that's the case, how do you explain the 71% load factor, which is highlighting that, in fact, the aircraft are too large? Your aircraft, Airbus's aircraft. The history seems to say that those aircraft that have been delivered are too large, and therefore, why would that be a good predictor of the future? And does Africa not actually need more smaller aircraft? I'm very curious about the only 2% regional aircraft.
Good question. In fact, the choice is the result of the passengers' flow and sometimes the cargo flow. So if you combine the whole payload, including passengers and cargo, you may end up with a solution that seems to be bigger than the passenger's requirement, but a best solution at a time. So, and that's what's happening currently on the market. You have to consider that when you look at Africa as a whole, there are very few markets that can sustain more than 100 passengers a day. Very few markets. But on those 10 markets, the distance is about 400 to 450 nautical miles, and there is no cargo solution. So when you make the choice of an airplane, you have to consider, yes, it may not be optimized for the passenger flow, but there is a requirement for cargo flow as well. So can this type now combine, offer a good payload solution? And that's where sometimes you get to the answers, to the solutions that are existing on the market today, which are mostly the 737s.
Thank you, Chamsou. Any further questions in the room? Have we that ably answered all the questions which are raised? It seems so. John is smiling.
There's
the
one
first
here.
door is going open. Or do you have a question, John?
There's one here.
No, but there's oh, okay, last one. No,
There's another one over there.
One more thing to share before lunch, though. It's only a quick thing, but yeah, one more question. So, Sean, that's all right.
Sean Bradley, FastJet. I think it's more of a comment, to try and understand the landscape of Africa, we know the diversity, whether it's Southern Africa, East Africa, West Africa, each region is different, every single market is different. So one goes about the decision of which aircraft is right for the airline and which is right for Africa. So let's say all the tick boxes have been ticked, and one starts operating or you start embarking on some new routes. There are regulatory challenges that also happen. There is different landscape in terms of competitive behavior that happens. So I just look at the hiding that we took in Tanzania, for example. Huge percentage of our revenue that originates out of that market. And ATC went and started operating the 787 on domestic routes. So you take a 104 capacity versus the 787 into a market there, and you start looking at what happens from a fare perspective, and sector fares being driven down from $120 down to $49, for example. How long can you actually sustain that? Going to one of our other key markets where we're busy developing, and please, I'm not for 1 minute saying that competitive behavior is not healthy and important. I think it's all the pillars in the market, it's all the stakeholders coming together to say, what do we do to actually grow the economy, that everybody can actually grow market share. So we take Mozambique, you've got LAM, you've got ourselves operating, we start seeing some growth happening, and Ethiopian welcomed into the market, but 3 carriers operating on domestic routes in a market that is showing pretty slow growth. The oil and gas promise hasn't quite delivered. It's very exciting. That's showing opportunity going forward. But how long do we have in terms of actually surviving? So really what I'm saying here, my end message on that is, I think it's a multitude of things that also come into play in terms of making those decisions. And it's a pretty tough environment. So thank you.
Thank you. I would like to take the opportunity to thank my panelists here, Mark, Chamsou,
Antonio.
I forgot my name.
Antonio, Michal, thank you very much. I specifically thank you for being respectful to each other. I'm sure the temptation was there to take a dig at your competitors, but I do thank you that you
It's
showed
like the
respect
gladiators.
and were civil.
They don't see some blood. They go home disappointed.
Well, we can open a session up here, you know, if you want to, a little longer, and said, please, now you can have a go at each other. Thank you for the audience. You were very attentive. I applaud you as well.